What is the outer space, Professor?
Well, I think that's a very big question. I spent many years of studying space, outer space, and space law. And also, of course, I think it's rather difficult to define the concept of outer space. There are quite a lot of discussions. We know that international society has been doing research on space law. The first man-made satellite was launched in 1957 by the former Soviet Union. Then afterwards, I think the United Nations has been able to discuss the issue. And well, I think there are some discussions regarding, I think, the term outer space. I don't think we will be able to define at the current stage, but it's quite clear that outer space is above airspace. Now the question is how to divide airspace and outer space. That will be more pragmatic. The item itself has been put in the UN corpus, United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, UN corpus, for more than well, for 50 or 60 years already, and we do not have answer yet. So after 50 years of discussion within the UN Corpus Forum, the international society decided to be more pragmatic. That means we are not going to define outer space, but we will leave to the international community to have a state practice. So afterwards, we can find out that several countries have already made their own national laws regarding outer space. The first one is Australia. Australia changed its National Space Act. So basically, remove the term outer space to be replaced with the term any space above 100 kilometers above the sea horizon. So that's the first Space Act, which really defines this outer space. But then Indonesia also has a legislation which similarly takes the approach. So that means now when we really talk about the outer space, we normally refer to 100 kilometers above the sea horizon. That will be the one way. But I must admit, I think there's no consensus yet. If you look at discussions, there are various definitions for outer space. You can see some definition from the functional perspective. That means if the aircraft flies, that belongs to airspace. If the spacecraft flies, then that belongs to outer space. That's a functional purpose. But there are also some technical definition regarding 100 kilometers above, or some views that probably 200 kilometers above. But that will be the theoretical discussions. Now I think probably majority or most countries will believe that we probably will use 100 kilometers, but we will still need to wait and see. For sometimes, the international society believes the definition itself becomes more relevant because our aerospace travels is in place now. So we do need to look at if the aerospace flight flies over airspace, do we use air law? If you fly to outer space, we use space law. Is that too complicated or not? So I think the issue becomes more and more relevant now.
To draw a parallel, for example, under law of the sea, which a lot of countries belong to, except the United States, I think, there's a concept of, you know, if it's a 20 nautical miles, it's part of your place, really yours, economic, you know, exclusive economic zone. Outside, it's not. And I heard the 20 nautical miles is defined because of how the distance of traditional cannonball can cover, right? So, you know, 100 kilometers, 100 kilometers, is that by reference to anything that, you know, outwardly seems fair and reasonable for people who don't know this space, this area, but for those who are in the maybe aerospace industry or military industry, is 100 kilometers meant for something, some purpose that, you know, you could shed light on?
Yes, I think the discussion regarding 100 kilometers, I think is very interesting. They thought that when aircraft flies, normally they do really need to have the force from the air. But for the outer space, then that means that when the spacecraft flies, there's no need to have air support. So I think that's kind of the understanding. But again, as I said, there are different views regarding the division between air and outer space. So I think that's something to start with. But later on, different countries might have different views regarding the outer space or airspace. Some spacefaring nations, they want to have more control, more freedom. We can imagine they would like to probably the outer space or airspace will be lower the division, so that have more control. We know that in our airspace, the state should have full control. That's a state sovereignty over airspace. So in a way, that spacefaring nations, they are thinking that probably we should have goals a little bit higher. So because they do have the technology to control. So, but that's spacefaring nations or developed countries. For developing countries, they really would like to see that it goes lower a little bit. They don't really have to go that far. So we can find out that the divisions between air and space and outer space actually not that technical. It also has something to do with the political considerations, the control, state power. How can you control? So that's really, I think, a bit complicated in that sense. The other point, I think they use a law of sea. Indeed, we have the territorial sea, we have the high seas, but we also have an EEZ, exclusive economic zone. So that means in the airspace and outer space, probably we are not only looking at the airspace and outer space, we probably can also look into the middle point. That means between airspace and outer space, there could be some areas which go in between. So there are also some discussions. Now we look at the low airspace economy. So that goes a little bit higher, but it's still below the space. So the discussion, I think, probably have something similar to the discussions in a law of sea, probably.
It's very interesting. In fact, indeed, countries that were strong in naval power, seafaring nations, they wanted the exclusive economic zone to be shorter, so they can control, enjoy the rest of the international waters. So sounds similar. And it sounds like even for countries who are not big into aerospace today, if they keep the outer space set at a lower level, height, altitude, maybe they can reach outer space quicker. I'm not sure that's a reason. Okay, that's interesting. So again, can I ask philosophically? We all want to protect each other's our own sovereignty, right? And our sovereign nation, land. So is everything above our land of a country or below into the earth deep core belong to your country, a particular country? How does it work?
Yes, I think that's very important
I keep digging into it, dig to the other side.
Yeah, I think we are looking at that issue. I think probably we look at the upper part.
Okay.
Airspace, we have no controversies with regard to the state sovereignty over airspace. But when it comes to the outer space, I think it's quite clear that no country can claim for sovereignty. So it belongs to the common. So that's something to start with. But if we really look at the discussions, we will see some equatorial countries will be quite concerned. They are not very technologically developed. So, but we know that geostationary orbit is very valuable. If you station or put 3 satellites along the geostationary orbit, then the satellite can scan the whole globe. So that's why we can find a lot of countries, or the United States, China, willing to put the satellites in the geostationary orbit. The geostationary orbit is above the equatorial countries. So equatorial countries were very concerned. In the 1970s or in early 1980s, have released a Bogota Declaration. They declare that the airspace and outer space above their territory should belong to their own country. They should have full control of all this, the airspace and the outer space. But of course, I think later on, no one really cares.
So including a geostationary satellite in your space, above your airspace.
Yeah.
They don't like that. Yeah.
So they are very concerned in the future when they have the technology to launch a satellite. All the orbit has been occupied by developed countries. So I think that's why they argue about the geostationary orbit belongs to their own country. those above their territory. But this has not been accepted. No one really cares. They just thought it's a joke.
Oh, you have a declaration, but those who can send it up don't care.
That's right.
Oh.
No one cares.
Okay. There's a LEO, GEO, anything other classifications of satellites in terms of positioning? Low orbiting, but yeah, you have GEO.
Yeah, I
Is
think
there high orbiting?
satellite, I think I would say, can be used for various functions, various purposes. And we know that satellite can be normally of dual-use nature. It's rather easy for the civil use satellite to transfer to military use. So almost all countries are very concerned, and of course have been very worried about potential military implications. So in that sense, they have been looking into the issue very seriously, how to make the use peaceful. So that will be the major issue.
I wonder, I mean, people do talk about Star Wars in the making, but when people send satellite to space, does it need to be checked by some other nations or some committee, or they just send whatever they want? We don't know what's in the bag.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I assume we are talking about the 1980 Reagan administration has a Star War at the time. So this has something to do with understanding of the peaceful uses of outer space. Starting from the very beginning of the space age, we have already believed that the peaceful uses of outer space belongs to the customary international law. That means even if you are not a member to a treaty, peaceful uses of outer space shall apply to all the country. So you are bound by this obligation. It's true, I think almost all the countries believe that yes, the outer space is for peaceful purposes. But the problem is, how do you understand the term peacefulness? The United States and some other countries believe that peacefulness means non-aggressiveness. Non-aggressiveness. That means outer space or space technology can be installed in outer space for defensive purposes. It's possible. But for a long time, the former Soviet Union and China believe that peacefulness means non-militariness. That means you cannot install any space weapons in outer space. So in that sense, we can understand why the Reagan administration believes that it's good to have Star Wars. You can install or station some space weapon or so-called weapons in outer space for defensive purposes, self-defense purposes. So that will be possible. But of course, you cannot use a space weapon to attack other country. This every country believes that attacking purposes will be illegal. But for self-defensive purposes will be legal according to the American legal theory. At the current stage, I must say more and more countries has already adopted non-aggressive concept. So that means, of course, I think you can still use for self-defense purpose. But the problem is that if we really have to define the dual-use nature or civil or military nature, it's rather difficult. So that's a major concern for most countries. Japan, for sometimes, they adopts a view that should be non-military purposes. But around 2010, they changed their National Space Act to include the non-aggressiveness in their law. So we can see more and more countries are changing their position. China, we still believe that non-militariness should be the essence of the peacefulness. But if we look at the positions from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they also have made some change in the understanding of peacefulness, that we should acknowledge the existence of space weapons already in outer space. So that's a fact. And we have to be more pragmatic in understanding the term peacefulness.
In terms of hogging space in space, there's a something link project, and you're sending up all these small satellites into space. There are some perception that some companies are just going to take up all this space first. It's almost first come, first serve. In practice, maybe not by law, until there is a proper law on it. How does it really work?
Yes, I think first come, first serve purpose. I think indeed, if you have the technology, I should simply launch the satellite to outer space. you have no way to prevent me. So I think that's true. But we also notice that nowadays the space club is expanding. More and more countries are capable of launching satellite, and they need to make use of the satellite for their own use, for various purposes, for weather broadcasting, for TV broadcasting, etc. So that means we do need to have some coordination. If there are too many satellites in outer space, there definitely will be interference. We are talking about harmful interference. So in that sense, we do need to have some kind of coordination mechanism in place. At the moment, the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, plays a role in the coordination. This also provides a mechanism to ensure that all the countries shall have the opportunity to launch a satellite to the orbit. That means almost all the countries are allocated an orbit and frequency for satellite, for radio purposes, etc. But of course, it's up to you. If you do not have the launching capability, what can you do? You cannot waste the orbit. Then you can rent out or you lease your orbit to other countries. So you can also make money or make profits out of using your own orbit. In the future, if you have the capability of launching satellite, of course, you can take it back.
There are some of us who are not into space as much as you are. I think you also teach Asgardian law, don't you? What does it mean by Asgardian law?
Yeah, I think I do not teach Asgardian law. I don't think Asgardia has a lot to teach, although I think Asgardia as a nation, I wouldn't say the nation. Of course, we claim ourselves to be a space nation, the first space nation, but in essence, I normally define it as an NGO, non-governmental organization with the aim to become a nation, to be recognized by the UN. Of course, I think it's now still making efforts to be recognized by a specific country, small country first. But I also mentioned that as a nation, we need to make sure that it satisfies the traditional definition for a state under the UN framework. That means you need to have a territory. Is that possible to have a territory in a sense? I also mentioned that you, of course, if you launch a satellite in outer space, you can use the space within the satellite or like the space station, etc. You can still have full control of the space within the space station. That's possible. But in the space law field, you never claim you have the territory in outer space. It's against the space law. So that means you need to have a territory on Earth. So they are thinking about probably purchasing some territory from some small island countries, but I do not have follow up that because I only look at the legal aspect. If they buy territory, I think that is their job.
That's interesting.
But when, of course, I think the Asgardia is making national laws. I help them to make some.
Where is it located?
Well, the NGO was registered in Austria, Vienna. So it's an NGO registered in Austria, in accordance with Austrian law. So that's something we look into. But as a space nation, the so-called space nation, we do need to have a law, right? So I think first of all, we have the constitution. I think, this has been made more than 5 years ago. Later on, we also make several other laws. I myself also propose some laws like the judiciary law, but we also look into the ADR law, so for dispute resolution. These are in a process, but they also have made laws for the currency and also other issues because they have different committees to look after various issues, just like a nation. The parliament, they have different committees. They also have the kind of a state council is type, so they have ministers overseeing various issues.
Now, there are international courts to deal with war crimes. There are international courts to deal with supposedly, the territorial sea disputes. What about space?
Well, I think if we still stick to the Asgardian, we of course have the Supreme Court, which oversees 4 branches on civil, administrative, and also criminal, etc.
But what
So
about the
this
other
field,
countries?
we, of course, first of all, it transcends national borders. So that means we belong to part of the international law. Obviously, litigation is very important. We rely on International Court of Justice. But unfortunately, we do not have any case before the International Court of Justice yet. So that's one part. But also, we can find out several efforts have been made with regard to dispute resolution in the space field. The first effort was made in the 1972 Liability Convention. Liability Convention, first of all, recognized the role of International Court of Justice in a dispute resolution process. But at the same time, they believe that it's rather important to have mediation in place. If you fail the negotiation, consultation, etc., then the Liability Convention provides that it's good we can set up a claims commission. Claims commission actually is quite similar to arbitration, but it's not binding. But of course, the 2 countries can agree upon the binding effect of the decisions that are made by the claims commission. So that's one earliest efforts. Then in 1998, the International Law Association adopted a draft convention regarding dispute settlement in the space field. In this document, I would say, I think this document was made in 1998, but has never entered into force. But a lot of the mechanisms are very important. Brings us to think about what kind of a mechanism can be in place for space disputes. It divides the dispute resolution into 2 types. One is binding, the other is non-binding. The non-binding dispute resolution basically refers to the consultation, negotiation, and mediation. So mediation, it put down that 5 mediators can be can constitute a mediation body. So 1 presiding, 2 to be appointed by 2 parties, so that altogether 5 mediators for space disputes for mediation. That's the first. If the mediation fails, then you can still go to arbitration. So arbitration, again, there are 5 arbitrators to constitute arbitral tribunal. But in this sense, in this case, for arbitration, each party can only appoint 1 arbitrator. 3 arbitrators to be appointed by the arbitration commission. So that's for arbitration. But very importantly, this document also illustrates the possibility of setting up a space tribunal. So this is exactly what we noted about the international level. We do not only have International Court of Justice, we also have tribunals for the law of sea. We also have the International Criminal Tribunal. And actually, in the same time, in 1998 or 2000 at the time, a lot of international scholars are talking about the Space Tribunal and also Environmental Law Tribunal. But of course, these 2 has never come into reality. But that's one very important development at that time. Now we are talking about disintegration of tribunals. Do we need to have so many specialized tribunals or not? So there are some concerns. So that's effort was made in 1998, which never came into force. But most important development was made in 2011 or 2012. The Permanent Court of International Arbitration in The Hague made an optional arbitration rules for space disputes. So that's the optional arbitration rules. It provides some guidance regarding the possible rules for the resolution of space disputes. I think this optional arbitration rules is very useful, but again, I think you can see this optional arbitration rules has been in existence for 12 years already, but no one or no parties have adopted, use these optional arbitration rules. Okay. So that's why I think we are looking to any problem with these optional arbitration rules. If you look at the Permanent Court of International Arbitration, PCA, Permanent Court of Arbitration, they do have various optional rules, not only space, but also for financial or other specific type of disputes. Rules have been used by different parties, but not space disputes. But everyone believes that the arrangement is very good. The problem is, well, I don't know whether it's right or wrong. They talk about that we should have more capacity building to promote the optional arbitration rules so that more people will know. So that's a major concern. I don't know, I think I should go a little bit further about the optional arbitration rules for space disputes. Probably AALCO should also in the future can draft some optional arbitration rules for AALCO.
Well, in fact, just a month ago in Bali, AALCO had our 47 countries get together, annual congress. This is our 61st congress, and together the countries publish a paper about outer space law. So there will be something brewing, I think, but there's some consensus.
Yeah, I think it's good because I think we should not really understand that space disputes is so far away from our daily lives. I think actually I myself being serving as arbitrator or as expert witness for the space disputes already for satellite, TV broadcasting, etc. So quite some cases I think all in a larger scale. So I think it's very important to take it as a normal issue. In the optional arbitration rules, I think very important to see about the confidentiality advisor was set up in the optional arbitration rules. Not only experts, of course, I think we do not expect arbitrators to be experts in the space law or space technology. You can always appoint experts for the purpose. But this optional arbitration rules provides a confidentiality advisor. So what's the purpose? The reason is that they believe that space disputes involves very sensitive or high state secret issues. So sometimes the parties are not willing to share the secrets with the arbitrators. So they can, of course, appoint their own confidentiality advisor. So they can talk to the confidentiality advisor. The advisor can use a neutral term to describe and talk to the arbitrator. So in a way can protect the state secrets or national secrets. So that's the purpose. And this has been considered to be a very important breakthrough in the design of arbitration rules for space disputes. So I think that will be something which I think is very important, a breakthrough that never before, I think.
I remember hearing in Hong Kong, government projects, infrastructure projects, it used to be the prevailing view at the time, at least, was the government isn't that open-minded to resolving disputes via anything but court. Because if you go through mediation and you, as a government, if you give up on something, then, did you give up too much? Will someone challenge you for having given up too much? But then to drag it out in court is expensive and tedious. But I think, that position has been resolved. The government goes on and support locally anyway here, mediate first, and then happy to consider arbitration. But you said, normally with 3 arbitrators for international arbitration, you said 5. So each side appoint 1. Why do you want 3 when it's more confidential for space? Sometimes the national security element. Is it because it involves some public resource, space should belong to more people than just a few people deciding on a case?
Yeah, I think the 5 people was provided in the 1998 ELA, International Law Association Convention, which has never come into force. But for the optional arbitration rules, it provides us a possibility of 1, 3, 5, or 7 arbitrators.
Yes.
So it's up to the parties to decide how many arbitrators to be involved. As you said, I think for confidentiality, I think probably we should have 3. That's good enough. But of course, I think it leaves to the parties to decide. In a way, I think 3 will be normal. Otherwise, I think 5 or 7, I think really very costly. But of course, I think if there's a high amount of money in dispute, of course, is that possible? But again, I think the space disputes, many of them can be involve state security, national security, etc. So some will be more willing to do that.
In the audience, we have Henry, who leads a NGO for aeronautics, aviation, space, right?
I have actually organized, a charitable body called Hong Kong International Aerospace Charitable Foundation. The purpose of it, the objective of this organization is to promote aerospace education technology, and also trying to promote Hong Kong as a space hub. We are also interested in, promoting the peaceful, adoption or use of space law. That would be, our future, objective to do.
Henry is a great lawyer, and
Yeah.
I'm very pleased to see he's venturing into this space.
Yeah.
Well done, keep it up.
Well, now we are not only talking about, I think, space technology development. I know, I think, that a space launching company has been set up in Zhangguangao. Also, they are trying to look into possible launch of the satellite from possibly from Djibouti. So that's the plan. But more importantly, I think actually in Hong Kong, we are looking to the space economy. This, of course, I think is really most relevant to Hong Kong. Technology, of course, is on one side, but I think Hong Kong should look at the space economy. So how to nurture the space economy, I think that's very important. And we are looking at, actually, I think, much broader issues. At the earlier stage, we look into the telecommunications. So that has been very successful. I think Hong Kong in 1980s or 1990s already lowered the telecommunications rate and also used remote sensing, I think, very widely. But now we are looking to the space economy, how to commercialize the space technologies in Hong Kong and to make profits out from the space activities. So I think that's something we actually have been looking to. I think we hope with our opportunities, I think, to get involved, not only, I think, from the Hong Kong per se, but actually, I think, also looking to the mainland side, how Hong Kong can participate in some projects to study specifically the commercial aspects of the space activities.
Let's move on to cyberspace. So is it, I mean, even outer space is not lawless, so cyberspace, is it lawless? What is your view?
In the first place, when I studied space law, I think always space is outer space. That's it. But later on, I think when I did my doctoral degree, then I told my PhD supervisor or promoter that I would like to continue my research on space law. Then he said, okay, of course you can do. Then he asked me, oh, you probably can do research on e-commerce. E-commerce. Why? Of course, we know that cyberspace created by the internet and e-commerce has been the most important activities carried out in cyberspace. Cyberspace without the satellite, there's no way to have cyberspace, the internet, etc. So increasingly, we are also looking part of the cyberspace issues. Well, cyberspace, I think we do found some laws now. In the 1998 or 1999, there were quite some discussions whether we need to have law for cyberspace, because at that time, cyberspace is a buzzword, has been used very frequently, but many people say that's nothing really different from the physical place. We simply transplant the physical law, traditional law, to cyberspace. That will be easy, but we also found out that indeed there are two types of activities in the cyberspace. On one type of space activities is that the traditional activities you can carry out in the physical world, but also in the cyberspace. That does not really change much. So that means we can continue to extend the traditional laws to the cyberspace. But we do find out some activities are so unique or typical to happen in cyberspace. That means we do need to have some laws to regulate. So the early stage, I remember, I think when I first came to Hong Kong, I think when I joined the City University of Hong Kong, it's time I look into the laws. Then there's a discussions regarding the Electronic Transactions Ordinance, ETO. They have made this law, but later on, just within 2 or 3 years, they found out that the ETO is lagging behind. We are not only looking at the digital technology, we can also have biometric technology, etc. So that means the digital signature can be much broader than we normally understand. So later on in 2005, etc., they change the definition to a more neutral term. So we can find out that laws already started quite early to try to deal with a specific type of activities in cyberspace. But the cyberspace, the nature itself has changed so much. I still remember in the 1995, 1996, when I read the journal articles on cyberspace. Now we are looking into the 4th type of international space. The other 3 types which exist in physically, we talk about outer space, we talk about Antarctica, we also talk about the deep sea bed. So these 3 places belong to international space. Now we have the 4th type of space, that's a cyberspace, because no one can claim for sovereignty. But now, in the last few years, we realize it totally changed. We are also talking about the sovereignty issue. That means not only at the international level, we need to have a consensus or cooperation regarding the regulatory regime for cyberspace, but at the national level, we also have already a lot of rules, regulations in place to regulate all these activities already.
So cybercrime is quite rampant. I mean, we have the traditional phone scams, right? SMS and so on. Now WhatsApp and phishing mails and so on, using internet. So what do you see should be done or are being done in other parts of the world or this part of the world? What can we do to help protect the people from cyber fraud?
Although I wouldn't claim myself to be an expert in criminal law, but I think actually it's quite similar. We can find out that cybercrime it can be divided into 2 different categories. I think for the one type of crimes which can be conducted using through the use of the internet or ICT, but this belongs to the traditional crimes. We can see the crimes ordinance and also other traditional laws already in place to deal with this issue. But there are also other type of crimes which are unique to the cyberspace. So that part, we do need to have some rules in place to deal with the cybercrime. But the current stage, if we look at the relevant ordinances in Hong Kong, we have the crimes ordinance, we have the telecommunications ordinance. So all these rules which touch upon the cybercrime are scattered in different provisions. There's no consistent rules. So in a way, we find out that cybercrimes becomes more frequent. I think actually becomes more serious. We need to seriously consider separate rules or ordinance to deal with cybercrimes. That will be most relevant and will be very useful, so that we can have a reference to these separate rules to look into the possible regime governing the cybercrime. That will be the most useful and helpful. This, of course, can be helpful for the capacity building. If you use separate ordinance, I think it's rather difficult for people to understand. Now, if we have the uniform set of rules, this is really good for the promotion, for the capacity building, for the public awareness. So that will be rather important. But we also found out that actually the rules that were made actually for probably 20 years ago, there were some reviews regarding the criminal laws or cybercrime related provisions. So that will be quite outdated, or probably we can find out some terms maybe not that appropriate for the cyberspace era. So we need to really have a better understanding of the term. For example, if we are talking about the telecommunications installation, well, are we use the term to represent computer or not, or we should have a broad understanding or not. So that would be something, or are we talking about something tangible or intangible? So in crimes ordinance or telecommunications ordinance, we probably also have to seriously consider the intangible issues. So I think all these terms need to be updated, and we should include the latest developments in these rules. I think other issues I probably can think about probably will be the punishment. I'm not too sure whether the current punishment will be sufficient to deter the cybercrime or not. But I noted that some countries have already imposed more serious punishment penalty on the cybercrimes. So that will be rather useful, I think, to deter the cybercrime. I understand, I think the government has issued some consultation paper. Probably, I think it's good to look into relevant recommendations. So that will be for punishment. Another issue, I think probably I can talk about for the cybercrime regarding the actual territorial jurisdiction. I think it's very, very important. Probably common law jurisdictions have have been very wary of using the actual territorial jurisdiction. But the cybercrime,
long arm, right?
Yes, that's right. But cybercrime, you can see the cyberspace transcends national borders rather easily. So we probably will really have to look into the possibility of applying the so-called long arm or the extraterritorial jurisdiction issue. I think that will be rather useful to curb the cybercrime. But of course, this probably also goes to another issue for the international cooperation. If you use your own efforts to curb the cybercrime, it's probably not enough. We are using, probably have to cooperate not only with governmental cooperation, judicial cooperation, we also look into the cooperation between or among law enforcement agencies in different jurisdictions that will be more effective and efficient in deterring the cybercrimes.
You talked about the telecommunications ordinance somehow being outdated. Understandable, it's been there for a long time. And some examples you shared with me just before we walked in includes the following. You said the TO telecommunications ordinance made it illegal to intercept messages, but these days, if it's just 0, 1, binary, text, it's not a message in and of itself. Then are you intercepting a message? It's not like a letter that you intercept. But laws are meant to be tech neutral if you pass it. But this is to deal with cyberspace. So China have data privacy law, data security law, cyberspace law, and so on that protects. We draw a distinction. If you're critical information infrastructure provider, then you have to do self-assessments. There are some requirements. And the Chief Executive of Hong Kong in the recent policy address, there's one paragraph there that talks about Hong Kong will look into protecting cyberspace, in particular starting with protecting essential infrastructure. So is it done elsewhere too? I mean, are you supportive of this idea? Is it broad enough?
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think as far as essential infrastructure, or sometimes I use, because when I really look into the Chinese legislation, I look into the CII, the critical information infrastructure. I think that has been defined actually in the 2017 cybersecurity law, and later on, the State Council also issued the administrative regulations regarding the protection of CII. I think these forms the basis for the protection of CII. Of course, the CII is very closely relevant to the national security and national economy. If we look at the Chinese legal regime, it not only, of course, talk about the definition of a CII and also the protection of CII. It actually gives you very clear ideas about the various stakeholders, various entities that are involved should take up their own role. So, for example, the governmental entities can make legislation and can supervise the operation of the rules and also the CII, and also the private entities, they also need to conduct the assessment and also apply for permit. And then, of course, it also touch upon the promotion and capacity building for the CIRs. So that's one part I think we can note. I think China has been moving rather fast, I think from 2017 to 2021. But again, I think if we look at the international level, I think it's very interesting to see the latest developments. One effort, again, was led by China. China worked together with some former Soviet Union countries. They made the Code of Conduct for Information Security in 2015. It provides some general rules or guidance regarding the use of all this information. That's one aspect. It's the soft law documents, that one. And then another very important development is regarding Tallinn Manual 2.0. Tallinn Manual 2.0 is another very important document which touch upon the importance of a CII. The first version, actually, the first version of the Tallinn Manual was done mostly by governmental officials. But second version, it has incorporated quite a lot of academics for discussion, and it made it very clear this belongs to soft law making process, and this has more academic purpose. So it's important to see the international level. They have already some efforts to regulate the CII already. There are some consensus, but there are also some divergent views. The consensus, I think, is very general, very principled. For example, it talk about the peaceful settlement of disputes if there's any kind of issues regarding CII. They also mention about the cyberspace sovereignty issues. The CII is closely related to national security, so it's a part of the sovereignty issue. They also mention about some preventive measures, etc. But they do have some divergence in the discussion. For example, they are a bit concerned about the data message sovereignty. No problem, we talk about cyberspace sovereignty, but do we really need to extend that far to the sovereignty over data message or not? So there are some different views, but the work is still ongoing. We have the second version, 2.0 version. I'm sure I think the work is still ongoing. It discussed also at the Internet conference in Wuzhen these few years, I think actually 2 or 3 years already. But I think in the future, we probably will see more results will be released. I think this all provides some scenarios actually for Hong Kong to consider, I think, whether this will be useful and how to regulate CII in Hong Kong.
My experience is from working with multinational corporations. When China first introduced its own concept of CII, a number of international companies were saying, first, can you defer for a year? What is a CII? Yes, you have some definitions. Over time that says if you process how many personal data or you process them outside of jurisdictions, then you could be considered CII. But there are also some countries that CII essentially more of if you are providing gas or electricity, or you are a choke point, you are important network, then you are a CII. In mainland China, there were some time that for a period of time, multinational corporations, some of them are not sure whether they fall or not fall in the definition. Essentially, the government does not know the number of data they process. It's hard to know whether they fall in the definition. So in those cases, they engage lawyers to start to prepare as if though they might be a CII, and then yes, there would end up to be more costs in doing it. If eventually they're not really a CII, they felt they wasted their money. And then as time went on, it became, well, if by now you've not been informed you are a CII, you're probably not a CII. But what if they inform you tomorrow to say you are CII, then you might already be in breach if you're not ready. So there are those issues that happened before, in the mainland. So how does other countries deal with it? You think, what is the best way? Should we? But it can also add from a law enforcement perspective. Of course, if there are more, over-regulation, of course, is bad for business. But what is optimal? What do you think?
Thank you, I think, for all this background information. I think CII, actually, I think, I would say, I think China is not the first in coming up with legislation. We can see the United States actually is the first country to have introduced the protection of CII. Then it's followed by Japan, European Union, Australia, etc. So they all have their own rules. With regard to the enforcement agencies, I must say, I think if we look at the Chinese legislation or similar legislations, they, of course, I think talking about the stakeholders, I think one very important part is the multinational and private entities. They have the obligation, I think, to have the self-assessment and also a reporting system, etc. But we can also find out that this is not only the job for the private entities, we also need to have other entities to be involved. This can include the government entities and also the law enforcement entities. I think these are also very important. We should not take it that the job leaves to the private entity, then all things will be good. Self-regulation, I agree, will be applicable largely in the internet or cyberspace field. But when it comes to CII, I must say some certain intervention from the government or public or enforcement authorities or agencies will be helpful. So that exactly shows that the internet industry in 1996, the Clinton administration has mentioned about the principle of self-regulation. But the white paper itself also mentions that self-regulation is not enough. We need to have a certain amount of government intervention. This will be the ideal situation for the regulation of cyberspace and cyberspace-related activities. This is, again, I think the same for the regulation of CII. I think we do need to have involvement of various stakeholders. And in this sense, I think we need to emphasize about the important role of the law enforcement agencies. I think in, for example, in carrying out investigation, if any problem of damages comes out, I think that will be rather useful. On the one hand, we have the preventive management regulations or rules in place, but on the other hand, if anything happens, then what can we do? And that will be really the law enforcement agencies or police will be able to follow up to try to solve the issue. I think that will be important.
It's possible a bit to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, I'm John Lee from Fuhong Society. I would like to clarify one question. If somebody commit a crime in a high-rise building in Australia, maybe, more than 100 meters, height, can the law say that he commit a crime in outer space? Okay, that's one thing. Would the law on Earth have any effect to control the outer space? If a serious crime like murdering, so is it any loophole he can escape from the law? That is my question.
You mean the building is so high that it goes beyond what's the definition of
outer space? Definition of outer space.
Okay, that's very interesting. I think the technology will develop so quickly. I think we can have the building. But I must say, indeed, they are building the space lift elevator to go between different the planets. So I think that's possibility. And also, please note that China and Russia is trying to build some space lab on the moon. So I think that means they can have some buildings, right? I think on the moon or other celestial bodies. In that sense, we of course cannot claim that we have the ownership over the Earth, over the moon, or it's forbidden. But it's possible that if the building belongs to country A, then of course you can still have control and exclusive jurisdiction over the space within the space object, or that's a space station. So that's possible. You can still use the law. In a way, it's quite similar to the quasi-territorial jurisdiction you can use. That means you can use your own law to fight this to punish the guy. So that's possible. But in a space field, we have been very careful not using territory or sovereignty. But in reality, it's quite similar. This has been the real picture, the truth actually in the International Space Station, because we know that International Space Station is a cooperative project among many countries. I think, or we can see the United States, Russia, Canada, and EU, so I think around 17 or 18 countries. So they all claim to have some kind of control over their own parts that were attached to the ISS. So that means they can have control the person in that component part, and also the activities that were carried out within that area. So that's something we can find out. We only talk about the jurisdiction and control. We do not talk about sovereignty, or we do not talk about the quasi-territorial jurisdiction, but it's similar to that part. So yes, we can still deal with that. We probably, I think, note another case, I think, a few years ago. A female astronaut, I think, probably tried to steal the data or disclose the data of her boyfriend on the Earth. So that's a privacy infringement issue. So the many reporters mentioned this is the first space case regarding privacy protection issue. So this is also a space crime issue. So that means what kind of law we can apply? We use the place where you are committing the crime.
But also, what about the effect doctrine? I mean, if I shoot a bullet from my country, passing this country, and hurting you, then is a crime committed here or committed there?
I think that's true. I think, in fact, we can argue. I think if on the Earth, I think indeed you have suffered some damage, then we can claim for that as a jurisdiction. On the moon or celestial body, we then have to mention, I think, what kind of law should apply. We are not using the term of extension, natural extension of the territory. It never used in outer space. In the law of sea, we have the flagship. In the law of sea, in the airspace, we always say the airplane is a natural extension of natural territory, but this has never been used in space. But we use something very similar to apply the law.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks very much. My name is Jason. For let's say cyber attacks launch from the dark web to a certain specific location in Asia, let's say, could be from a host, could be from some AI machines just hosted out there. What kind of example cases or let's say jurisdictions would support that governance and oversight?
Yeah, I think if we talk about the AI, I think first of all, I think when we really look into the liability responsibility issue, I think definitely, I think the AI is only a tool. So in a way, I think as a human being, you will still be held liable or responsible. When it comes to jurisdiction, we still looking to try to find out some connecting point on the Earth. I think so. That's where's the terminal, etc. So I think we try to find the connecting point to define on the jurisdiction issue and also the applicable law issue. I think that's something I have in mind. I think with regard to what you have mentioned, I think that would be correct.
A follow-up question, Jason?
Yes, but also from machines hosted out of the dark web, so that's more non-registered systems outside of the World Wide Web. So whether there are some cases like that in the past, or if so, I guess there's more.
Well, I think in practice, even it's in the dark web, there's still a real person behind it.
Yeah.
But the issue is, can you find that real person and use the law in that country to go after? It's difficult. There are some, special proceedings in court that you could apply to see who's behind the IP address. If it's a civil case, it's harder for a normal person to ask for the data behind the IP address. It's easier for law enforcement agencies.
I'm Neve from Hong Kong Police Force. I can, from the first-hand angle, to say that it's very difficult, even for law enforcement agencies, to find out the genuine identities behind the IP address. Especially we all used VPN and even dark web to disguise the real identity. And when we find out the culprit, then we talk about jurisdiction. And for jurisdictions, I just want to ask, Professor, is there any ongoing international discussion on whether there would be any international treaties, like drugs, for combating dangerous drugs? We have 3 international treaties. Even for targeting human trafficking, we have other international treaties. But for cyber crimes, technology crimes, are there any ongoing discussion about that, given the present geopolitics or political situation right now?
There are, as I said, I think Tallinn manual, I think it's ongoing. It is defined to be of academic nature. So that appears to be will be easier. So that will be something we look into. Tallinn the manual, they not only involve the governmental officers, but also the academics. So I think that will be one very important initiative that are ongoing. And this will also touch upon the jurisdiction and also other specific issues already. But of course, I think in the other field, I'm not talking about the criminal areas. If we simply look at the civil and commercial procedure, I do notice some kind of negotiation is ongoing. For example, when I talk about the Hague Conference on Private International Law, HCCH, I think actually now is still negotiating on the final step about the jurisdiction project. That means we are not only looking at the direct jurisdiction, we want to have direct jurisdiction, how to define jurisdiction. So I think this is ongoing. But I must say again, even in the civil and commercial field, it's very difficult. And the negotiators appears to be very pessimistic. So they have been trying to come up with a backup plan. If this fails, what can we do?
I would add, with these things, they are obviously a geopolitical element. I'm not surprised if they are state-sponsored attacks from different countries to different countries and jurisdictions. So then for all the countries to get together to pass a law that regulates what they do, it's kind of difficult. If we observe how, some particular Western country have a lot of internet giants, their laws are unique and in the sense of more protective of the giants. Europe doesn't have as many tech giants, and the law are more protective of the people in that sense. Of course, civil law jurisdictions, like mainland China, is also people first. So the approach is going to be different. On platforms like AALCO, of course, you have the opportunity to discuss with friends to set either a convention or treaty or best practice to start with. But I think it's important to recognize it certainly needs concerted effort. And I think what we're hearing is if Biden and presidency gets to meet soon, cyber security is one thing on the agenda. So hopefully that would be a good development. But we'll see. Is any particular part of the law that, like Crimes Ordinance, Section 161, after a particular case, it made it difficult, right, to other colleagues maybe? Oh, microphone.
Well, I think as a professor just pointed out, when compared to other jurisdictions, I mean developed countries and jurisdictions like Singapore, the mainland, UK, United States, Europe, I think Hong Kong, I'm not saying in a professional or official capacity, I'm just my personal opinion.
Yes.
Hong Kong is far behind. I think Singapore is now discussing and will soon implement the 2.0, the cybersecurity law 2.0, the new version. But we are still discussing it right now. And I'm very glad that the chief executive will put the critical infrastructure audience or draft on table in this legislative year. I think Hong Kong is facing imminent challenges in regard to the cybersecurity and technology crimes. And Hong Kong do need new legislation for cybersecurity and technology crimes. And I think we should all work towards that.
And it's not just for the people, but also for attracting and retaining multinational corporations doing business here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And if other jurisdictions have protections, and Hong Kong is lagging behind, I think Hong Kong will have big problems.
Even, just up north in mainland China,
Main-
huge market, lots
yes,
of data.
absolutely. I think
different
the
standards.
mainland is having a new law almost every year. So we are a
in
little
this
bit
area.
thorough and perhaps too slow.
James, you introduce yourself, and also in what you see, are there companies looking into how to help protect the cyberspace?
Yeah, my name is James. I'm a founder of Jumpstart, and we're an ecosystem builder for startups and SMEs here in Hong Kong. Within the cyberspace realm, I think there's challenges, and I think startups are going to be at the forefront of actually working with cybersecurity and the governments to actually close any of the loopholes, really work. I think there's some startups in Hong Kong already that just focus on cybersecurity. Beyond that, I really am not an expert in this area.
But it's good opportunity for startups to, make a name for themselves.
Absolutely.
And do well.
I think the
Contribute.
young are the ones that are in the dark web, moving into the mature space. And as they mature, I think getting into the groups here. I think there's a lot of hacker groups in Hong Kong as well. I don't know if we're all familiar with that, but they are alive because we were threatened by hacker groups as well.
Oh.
So I think these are the ones that...
You call the person in front of you to solve it.
Really? So there are hard hacker groups out there. I mean, last week we had an event in Ocean Park and we had volunteers, and we had a young volunteer, and he just sent us a message. This is for you guys, right? That he says, and his parents sent us a message. He was 17 years old, and he basically said, someone has taken control of my image, and they have inappropriate AI images, and they blackmailed me. So things coming through, please ignore. And long and behold, this is only on Sunday, right? So it's just yesterday.
just happened, yeah.
Just yesterday. And someone sent inappropriate messages.
I'm sorry to hear that.
This is a youth as well, right?
Can I?
What do you guys do with something like that? That's a cybercrime, right? Where AI is taking over, because these AI could create inappropriate images very quickly.
Francis?
I can take that. Francis Lee, also from the Hong Kong Police Force. I think at the end of the day, going back to what was discussed at the forefront was AI is run by a machine, or person is behind that machine. It doesn't just comes up from the mountains or cracks of the earth, right? So somebody had created a program, had written the AI program, and directed it to do some attacks or alterations of images to do the blackmail. So what we do is, if it's reported, like when you're saying that your friend's son or a kid was experiencing that, then we'll take it over. We'll find out where the message was sent, and we'll also follow where the money goes, because it's blackmail. If he pays, of course, if he doesn't pay, that's even better. So what we'll do what we can do in terms of tracing cyber footprint backwards and forwards. But at the end of the day, like Eve was saying, we're so tied up with getting information from different sources, the use of VPN, the use of dark web, and the lack of cooperations from some private sectors, especially private sectors or social medias from overseas. They are not most helpful, to say the least. So a lot of times our abilities are seriously hampered due to the inability to cooperate or to offer assistance to us, even from a law enforcement point of view. So we try our best in doing what we could. The other aspect that we are tied up is, as again my boss just said, the lack of up-to-date legislation to help us. What we are relying on a lot of times are outdated laws in Hong Kong that were, dating back to when people were riding horse and buggies. So just go imagine that it just doesn't make sense to be using laws that are so outdated. So we definitely are pushing for reviews and definitely voices from the private sector and from the NGOs and professional bodies like yourselves to hopefully that, we'll drive things better and faster. I mean, if we look at what the, a lot of the times, the law reform commissions, the RLCs, are doing right now, they're doing great jobs. But I mean, we definitely wish those works could be speed up, like, just make it faster, because by the time with sexual laws and stuff like that, I mean it's taking some time. But I mean, at least sexual laws don't develop as fast as cyber law. Cyber law changes in a blink of an eye. It just evolves again. So I think that's something that we're facing right now. That we try to do better, but hopefully we do get better with a lot of these helps from private sectors, professional bodies, and legislative sides. Don't know if that answered your question.
Yes. Yeah. James.
Yeah, I think that answers really well. So one thing that actually happened was with the increase of AI, of course someone's behind it, but it's going to start increasingly make it easier for people to perpetrate these crimes. And I think that's the concern, right? And how does laws really address the increase in technology, and how does that apply for laws to change maybe in a quicker pace?
Couple of thoughts. Firstly, in certain parts of the world, you need a special license to operate VPN. Wonder what you all think. Question one. Secondly, apart from companies hiding in the dark web, there are companies in plain sight who we can access those, platforms, social media platforms, but they have a separate arm in Hong Kong that just take advertising revenue, doesn't operate it. In the US, there are concepts of grand conspiracy, and we don't seem to have that here. What on these two questions? And then thirdly, there's a telecom infrastructure provider in this room, and if that person wants to speak up, I invite that person to speak up as well. Maybe thoughts?
Well, we are perfectly aware of, Hong Kong police is perfectly aware of the recent development outside jurisdictions in Hong Kong. So I understand that, for example, in other jurisdictions like Singapore, if you take advertisement in Singapore, if you make money on social media by the social media giants, you have to keep and provide information, irrespective whether the server is in Singapore or not. If I have the power, I hope that Hong Kong will follow the steps of Singapore.
Yes. Terrific. Any comments? Oh, there's a hand at the back. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Kenneth. Thanks for Professor's sharing. I have questions about ADR, especially in cyberspace or ICT areas. We are promoting one of the ADR in domain name dispute resolutions, which is adopted in near 5 years, around maybe. What do you think? Which the next areas of ICT issues or can adopt ADRs in Hong Kong to resolve those problems or issues without litigations or the traditional methods? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think when you really bring up the issue of the domain name dispute resolution, I think which of course I think is my actually I think my favorite topic. I did my research I think actually 20 years ago and regarding the domain name dispute resolution. I always believe that domain name dispute resolution mechanism is the most successful example of ODR so far. We of course noted in the last few years there were some platform which were set up to deal with ODR, online dispute resolution. But we noted that I think not that successful in a way. I think they face quite a lot of difficulties. So that means I think for the domain name dispute resolution, on the one hand it's very successful, but we are also looking to possible ways to improve some concern. For example, there are concern regarding the possibly the system is more favorable to the complainant because the success rate for the complainant probably reached to 80 around 80% of successful rate for complainant. So they said, probably the mechanism itself is not that favorable to respondent. So do we need to really change that system or not? So there are some suggestions regarding the introduction of the appeal system. But I think that there are also some different views because we are trying to use domain name dispute resolution mechanism to resolve the disputes within 45 to 60 days. If we add in the appeal mechanism, that means we will lengthy the whole process. So that's something we look at. But with that's one issue. But further, if we look at the latest developments with the AI and also blockchain, there are some new type of domain name disputes come up. I think, for example, we do have the QR code disputes. There are also there are various type. I think the AI actually try to inspect. I think if you cancel a domain name, then it quickly register domain name. So that means the number of domain name disputes come up, and sometimes can be more complicated than what we normally do within 45 to 60 days. So that's another trend we can find out that they are trying to introduce ADR, a traditional ADR mechanism to resolve disputes. For example, if we look at the .fi, that for French domain name, they have already introduced mediation to settle the disputes. So these are all something we can find out that a domain name dispute resolution not stop there, which was introduced in 1999. After all these years, there are quite a lot of discussion how to make the whole platform to be fair to the two parties. So they're still ongoing. There are some review process also taking place now. But for me, I think I don't really think the introduction of the appeal system will be good. And if we say it's unfair to the respondent, but I also did some research saying that it's fair because indeed, if we look at the rationale, actually the complainant indeed has a right to the trademark and also has a right to some service mark. So I think so far it works, but of course I think we can put forward for review and also take into account the latest developments, whether the introduction of other type of dispute resolution mechanism in place, whether will be good for the maintenance of the healthy development of the domain name system or not.
Arthur, right? Thank you. I would say if you have more interest, speak to Sophia, who drafted the domain name dispute resolution rules for the Hong Kong AIC, and also Dennis, who ran the domain name dispute resolution practice of Hong Kong AIC for many years. He's also Dennis, please stand up. He's also my deputy director.
Expand the domain name dispute resolution mechanism to cover other area of IP, such as copyright infringement. Because there are so many illegal uploading and downloading of the songs in certain platforms that might trigger the need of a speedy and cost-effective dispute resolution mechanism, such as the UDRP mechanism for this kind of online copyright infringement.
Thank you all for coming today. Please put your hand together for our Professor, Zhao Yun. We have a little souvenir for Professor. Thank you. It's for you. Connecting Africa and Asia, our mission, 47 countries. Thank you.